Hi, welcome back to the Rum Ration podcast. I'm Rejoy.
And I'm Colin. And today we're talking about a piece of military equipment that's been essential to battlefield survival for centuries. Helmets, which for a couple of bald guys, and by the way, Rejoy, I'm not wearing a hat today because part of our listener comments was that they really appreciate the baldness. So I would encourage you to embrace your outer baldness.
I will definitely do that. Thank you.
Because, scalp and cranium protection, pretty darn important to us bald guys.
Yes.
But before we get started, there's two things we need to show. One, we've had some listener feedback on corrections from past episodes. But before we get to that, I'd like to point out my eternal gratitude to my phenomenal co-host, Rejoy Chatterjee, who went ahead and got us some incredible official uniforms, just like being in the Army. We're official. It says co-founder, Rum Ration Podcast, December 2024. If that doesn't make it official, I don't know what. And Jack is wearing his producer one right now. And Charlie is, I took over Charlie's room for recording, so who knows what he's doing, but I don't think he's wearing his super fan shirt yet. But we'll get there. Thank you very much, buddy. I think this is making it official. We got merch now.
Absolutely love it. And you'll note our colors. So
there you go. Of course. Absolutely. And so back to the listener feedback. In episode 1, Rejoy may have given folks the impression that scuttlebutt was exclusive to rum. But we had a certain Rear Admiral Christopher Robinson, who is currently commanding Canada's Maritime Forces Pacific, who sent in a correction. Scuttlebutt originally referred to a ship's water cask, or the wooden barrel where the water was kept. And that was where the sailors would have gathered to exchange gossip, because they didn't have water fountains and they didn't have water dispensing machines or vending machines. They had to go around where the water was, and that was the scuttlebutt. And it became synonymous with rumors or informal talk, because that's where the soldiers would gather. And scuttle literally just means the act of putting a hole into something. So when you heard of scuttling a ship, that's when they're sinking a ship. And a butt was what they referred to as a barrel. And for those of you who like to smoke pork shoulders, often known as a pork butt, and you're wondering why it's called a pork butt, because it comes from a shoulder nowhere near the pig's behind. It's because of the shape of the pork shoulder resembles a butt from a wooden cask back in the old days. So we had referenced how nasty the water would have been on those long sea voyages, and that's because it was being kept in wooden barrels for months at a time. So thank you, Chris, for sending in that correction.
Indeed. Many thanks, Chris, for pointing that out. Another small correction that we had to make is last time during our ode to RQ, Colin mistakenly referred to him as Howard when his name was actually Harold Goldstein. And thank you for George Goyer for pointing that out to us. Another gentleman who knew RQ very, very well back in the old days. And speaking of water and scuttlebutt, I've got my water. It is not rum, but here we are.
I have some as well.
Excellent. So now back to the presentation and today's episode 4, the evolution of military helmets. So this is one of my favorite subjects, really. I love the whole idea of it. And Colin, you and I have worn our share of military headgear. Helmets have really evolved alongside armor and uniforms over the course of time. Greeks, Romans, very well known, very recognizable armor. We move on to medieval plate, which is also something that's represented in Hollywood movies today. You see a lot of that, sometimes incorrectly, of course, but that is Hollywood. And from there, helmets have evolved into the high-tech ballistic equipment that we wear today. Really made the difference between life and death over the many eras of military history. But
before we get too far ahead of ourselves, Rejoy, I mean, you could put anything on top of your head and call that a helmet, right? So, all kidding aside, I'm sure back, cavemen were trying to do something to protect themselves from getting thunked on the head by Thor or Grog or whoever it was. But if we were focused mostly on what we consider like industrialized or standardized kind of a uniform helmet, who would we think of first?
Okay, when you talk about helmets in those terms, it would have to be the Romans. The Romans had developed what they call the Montefortino helmet, which was the first time where they wore a standardized type of helmet. And if you're trying to imagine what a Montefortino helmet would have been, try and sort of imagine a baseball cap worn backward, but made of metal and bronze, essentially. And they would have a detachable crest on top. So that is really the most recognizable, or the first standard idea of a helmet as a part of regalia.
Gotcha. So basically all the cool kids on the street wearing their baseball caps on backwards are not bucking authority or trending. They're just basically paying an homage to the Romans.
They're Romans.
Got it.
They're all Romans.
Right? Isn't that the thing now? All men are obsessed with Rome. We're thinking of Rome or something like that, apparently. Of
Yes,
course,
I
we
think
know
so.
that...
Yeah, I would agree.
We know that over time, soldiers have relied on their helmets for more than just protecting their heads, right? They use them for making makeshift cooking pots, to emergency water buckets, to making themselves seem taller and hopefully frighten their enemies. And sometimes even a well-placed helmet has even stopped a bullet that might have otherwise been fatal. And that was usually more luck than design, because a helmet that will stop a direct bullet, or if it was designed to do so, would be pretty much too heavy to wear.
That's very correct. I mean, the original helmets, I think we can really sort of get into that now. The medieval and early modern head protection, they were crude but effective, but they were designed basically for one thing, to stop the weapons of the time from cleaving your head in two. So the first ones that we can sort of talk about is the Great Helm and the bassinet. These are the two most recognizable forms of medieval headgear. So the Great Helm, the one on the left, this is a 13th century style example we have here, and that would have been worn between the 12th and 14th century. Large, cylindrical, fully enclosed the head, vision, blah, terrible, but it did offer excellent protection. And you'll see a lot of these replicated in Hollywood movies during the jousting sessions that knights have, and that they were worn for that. The bassinet came into effect between the 13th and the 15th century, and that's a more fitted type of helmet. The visor that you see in front, and this bassinet dates from about 1400 or so, they would have been able to lift that up so they could actually see, well, at least see straight ahead. If not, your peripheral vision is pretty badly affected. But in combat, that visor would come down, because in that time you're actually wading into the melee with your broadsword, two-handed, and you're trying to cut each other in half. And well, as time went on in the medieval era, the helmet also evolved into this, the German Stahlhelm. That was the first area where this particular helmet was designed. And here we have a good example of one from 1480 to 1490. And these helmets they became very popular. They were worn during this time period, the 15th century to the early 16th century, and they offered a rounded design. And if you'll note, both of these ones, the one on the right is an Italian version, but their main feature is extended neck protection, which actually can be traced back to the Roman imperial helmets, which everyone loves to replicate with the neck guard. So that comes from that time. And you'll also note that it actually had a more balanced weight. So here, these helmets also show an evolution of warfare, where they shift from a heavy static combat to a more mobile and tactical warfare style. So
these helmets would have been pretty heavy, right? Like sometimes
they are very
over
heavy.
10 pounds, I think. That's
yes.
like that's for perspective. That's double what a modern military helmet would weigh, which I think the Canadian helmet's just under 5 pounds right now. And they would have had some major drawbacks. But one thing I just dawned on me as you're talking here, I'm looking at these. These are beautifully crafted cylindrical style helmets. That's all done by hand. That would have taken probably weeks of craftsmanship to produce each one. They weren't exactly stamped out of a machine, right?
Absolutely. And
but
that's
also they would have limited visibility, poor ventilation, probably extreme discomfort.
Very uncomfortable.
I heard some knights that are even written about blacking out from heat exhaustion inside their helmets. I guess steel was never really considered a Nike dry fit kind of breathable fabric.
No, they were thinking mainly of just protection. So you can imagine during the Crusades, these are the type of helmets, like that Great Helm they would have worn out in Jerusalem. Can you imagine what that must have been like? They were designed for one purpose only, to try and keep you alive. So they would be very effective at deflecting sword blows. They were also designed to deflect arrows and crossbow bolts. There are some stories. Of course, it's all hearsay, but because you'll also note the rounded format of the helmet, so there's no they're kind of angled, so they can deflect blows. The way tank armor is angled and composite armor is angled. They had that idea way back in the medieval days to be able to deflect blows that were coming at the head. So one purpose only, really.
Right. So, and if we fast forward to the 19th century, military helmets have mostly disappeared from the battlefield. Instead, soldiers are wearing ceremonial headgear like the British shako you've got on the left there, the French kepi, and the German pickelhaube. Pickelhaube? Pickelhaube. See?
Yeah.
And most armies had adopted some taller headgear for their guards regiments to make them appear taller. And here I've got some notes to insert a joke to ridicule the guards and probably pick on our good friend Derek Chef, who we did face training with, because he was
Governor General
the Mighty Chef, I believe was his nickname.
Yes,
but
the Mighty Chef.
Mighty Chef. But we decided then we shouldn't make fun of the guards because Rob Foster, another great friend of ours from back on face training, was one of the first people out there to leave a nice positive comment for the podcast. So I guess we should be nice to the guards. And it's not just guards who do wear bearskins. You've got a guard's bearskin on the left here, but on the right, that's the Royal 22nd Regiment, the famous Van Der, with their mascot Baptiste on parade. And Baptiste is a gift from Her Majesty, because I remember a couple of times being with the Van Deus and people wanting to make fun of them for having a goat as a mascot. And I remember one of my buddies from the Van Deus just going, "Colin, do you know what you say when Her Majesty gives you a goat?" You say thank you.
Yes, you do. Slight genuflection as well. Yes,
absolutely. Yes. So yeah. So a lot of these were all just kind of like symbolic, right? A lot of them, but intimidation and visibility, like a large ornate headwear made the soldiers appear taller, more imposing. Yes. These bearskins were about but you see the front plate here, and you've got the extra feathers that go up to just give that extra height to make people seem taller and more imposing. And we're not going to make any comments about height here, Rejoy. That would probably
that would be ungentlemanly.
That would be ungentlemanly.
Yes, and we're both sitting down, thank goodness. So yes, indeed, and the bearskin, of course. Why the British foot guards were awarded the honor to wear the bearskin, because originally they didn't have a bearskin; they wore the shako like the line regiments.
I know it comes from the defeat of Napoleon. Maybe you want to give us the full details?
Correct. It was at the Battle of Waterloo, the final defeat of Napoleon, where when Napoleon was trying to finally break the British lines, and it was the last charge, and he threw in the old guard. So the Imperial Guard, the French Imperial Guard, had 3 different levels: the young guard, the middle guard, and the old guard. Now the old guard were the ones who were given the honor of wearing bearskins, and so they made their last charge towards the British lines, and they came up against the British Guards. And the commander of the Guards, General Maitland, had ordered his troops to lie down and to protect them from the artillery fire. And as the French Guards came up the hill, it is said that Wellington turned to Maitland and said, "Now, Maitland, now's your time." And it was up guards. They raised their muskets, and a couple of volleys later, the battle was over. And to honor their contribution, they were awarded by royal decree, they could wear the bearskin. So that's how the bearskin came to that. So the other thing about the 19th century headgear, other than looking absolutely stunning, I mean, man, I wish we had these. The taller part would have worked very well for me. But there was also the unit identification factor. So before the time of widespread standardized uniforms, it was usually headgear that would distinguish who was who and who was where. So that was a quick way to distinguish friend from foe on the battlefield. Because you can imagine what it was like. I mean, you got, in the age of muskets and the early rifles, a lot of gunpowder, a lot of fog, that kind of thing. You see a red and white plume waving in this distance, those are my guys. I'm going to go over there. So the colors and the plumes and the braiding helped commanders identify their troops.
You also had a practical use too, right? So some of them provided some limited protection, either from sun or from saber cuts during cavalry engagements. I know the British Charlton helmet and later shakos had leather, like stiffened leather reinforcements. And the pickelhaube was originally made of hardened leather, which was intended to offer some impact protection. Although it was, it's largely ineffective, any of these, against bullets, but they would stop some saber cuts and other things like that.
Yeah, and that was the other thing in those days also. I mean, the sabers looked very, 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 very scary and very intimidating, but the actual fact was they killed by the weight of the stroke. The edges were relatively dull. So it was that, that downward motion
Crushing
and
blow.
The weight, the crushing blow. That's really what would cleave through a soldier's head. So the leather was, kind of could help. in that kind of a situation. But there was also the morale and the discipline part of it. I mean, tall, structured headwear forced soldiers to stand up a little bit straighter. The discipline part of it, you feel like you're part of something important. I mean, during our time, we wore our berets, but which are relatively flat, but still you put it on, you feel like, but nothing like a well-shaped beret. So there's also that part of the morale and discipline.
Yeah, and of course, climate adaptation, right? Some headgear was designed for specific climates. The pith helmet, for example, which we've seen in many imperial movies and pictures like that, provided sun protection in colonial campaigns. It was based on a structure kind of like the bear skin, like an internal basket, so lots of room for air to circulate within to try and keep you cooler. And in colonial campaigns, you also had wool-covered shakos, which retained their heat in colder European weather. So probably you wouldn't want to be wearing that when you were trying to invade somewhere in Africa. And probably that's maybe where the term hothead comes from. Hey?
Look at that. Yes.
There is a story about a German soldier in the Franco-Prussian War who was knocked unconscious when his pickelhaube spike got caught on a doorway. Not exactly a life-saving feature, sadly, but I can sympathize being someone over 6 feet tall, and when I'm wearing a peak cap or a baseball hat and not really paying attention going into a smaller doorway, I've often banged my head against something like that because you're not really seeing where you're going. So that poor guy probably got stuck into the doorway.
Funny, I've never had that problem.
Not been an issue, eh? Well, this brings us back to our ever popular We Wish We Had a Sponsor segment.
Yes.
Should we play some intro music? Do. All right. Ahoy, rum lovers. Set your course for Pusser's Rum, the original Navy spirit that's been fueling sailors and the occasional questionable decision since 1655. Smooth, bold, and steeped in maritime tradition. It's the perfect drink for hoisting a toast, telling tall tales, or plotting your next adventure. Pusser's Rum, because scurvy is bad, but running out of rum is worse. Drink responsibly or blame it on the sea legs. That was some top-tier advertising, I'd say.
Yes, a masterclass in advertising, really, wasn't it? Makes me want to sail out and grab a bottle of Pusser's Rum immediately. But back to the episode. So let's talk a little bit about the First World War. That was really a game changer, wasn't it, Colin?
Yeah, like most technological advancements that we take for granted today, such as aviation, telecommunications, medicine, penicillin, all these things, a lot of it came out of the First World War. World War I changed everything. Introduction of artillery, mass industrialization of shrapnel, which if you don't know what shrapnel is, you can picture clouds of steel marbles exploding 20 feet above the ground, raining down towards you, and machine guns chattering constantly. This all made it clear that soldiers needed some real head protection. And in 1915, the British developed the Brodie helmet, a simple steel design meant to shield against shrapnel above all and debris. And Rejoy, I know you're a history guy. What was the distinguishing feature of the Brodie helmet's design?
Okay, the Brodie helmet was very interesting. It had a brim, so it looked like an upturned saucer, essentially. But the idea was very practical, and it was actually quite effective for its time for what it was designed for. It was to protect soldiers from debris and shrapnel, because in the First World War, it was the first time that there was such a use of artillery and the debris that rained down on soldiers and the shrapnel. And so when you're in the trenches and you're wearing a helmet that had this dish-like shape, it protected the head and to a certain degree the shoulders, and of course your ears from the fragmentation on the coming from overhead. And remember, when artillery lands and you've got even if it doesn't blow you to pieces, you've got all that other stuff flying around, and what goes up must come down. And that was really what was behind the design. And it dates from the idea, they say, dates from medieval times where British archers used to wear a similar, actually, a lot of European archers used to wear a similar type of helmet to, again, protect themselves from opposing archers' arrows and the downward sword blow.
I always thought it had an uncanny resemblance to what you see in the paintings and the wood cuttings of the Battle of Crécy and things like that.
Exactly.
The British archers. Yeah.
Yeah. It just goes to show, I mean, everything old becomes new again. You find new uses for it. And there's even, there's a story of a soldier actually in the trenches of Passchendaele. He actually wrote home, apparently. This is hearsay information, of course, but the helmet had stopped a fragment of the shell, and left a deep dent in his helmet, but fortunately not in his head. So, there you go.
I'll take that. So Rejoy, could you maybe flash back up the screen and show us what the thinking behind the Brodie helmet and what the French and Germans were doing around the same time? What did they come up with?
Yeah, happily. So here we have the three designs that people associate with the First World War. So on the left, we have the British Mark I Brodie helmet. So that was developed in 1915 because when the British first went to war in 1914, they wore forage caps. Like a lot of armies, the soft caps didn't expect to have to deal with that kind of heavy shell fire that they encountered. So this was developed in 1915 to counter the high casualties from shrapnel. It was the reason it's called the Brodie helmet was it was designed by a John Leopold Brodie, and very simple feature, bowl-like shape, wide brim for overhead protection. It was made from hardened steel, which offered durability while being cheap to produce. Also very important. The economy of warfare. Stamped out, exactly. Right. Three from just sheet metal and had very few additional parts. All the British forces, Commonwealth forces, wore this helmet in the First World War, including the Canadian Army. And it was adopted by the Americans when they got into the fight in 1917 as well. So the big pros for this was effective against shrapnel, especially direct overhead explosions. But of course, the open-sided design left the lower head and neck vulnerable. The French decided to go with a slightly different design. And you can see with true French style, there's a little bit of design involved there as well.
A little flair.
The little French flair there. And this is the French Adrian helmet, which was introduced also in 1915 because the French had gone to war wearing the képi, which we saw a picture of earlier on. So this was designed by Auguste Louis Adrian, and you'll note it actually has that distinctive crest along the top. So there are two reasons for this. One is, of course, it doesn't look too bad. It looks kind of cool, but it was really there for structural reinforcement as well, making it a very effective helmet. It was made of mild steel, though, primarily intended to protect against shrapnel rather than direct bullet impacts. And I must say also for the Brodie, it was pretty much the same thing. Direct bullets, it's not going to be as effective. But it was a more fitted design with a better weight distribution compared to the Brodie, and went on to be adopted by multiple nations, including Belgium, Italy, Russia, and it remained in service in various forms right up until the Second World War. And then the third one over there, we have the evolution of the German pickelhaube, which I think everybody can relate to the German Army in 1914
yes,
with that helmet. Oh, excuse me. So they kept the pickelhaube. It was still made of hardened leather, but what they did was they covered it with this camouflage cover, and the regimental number would be printed in the front so you could identify your regiment. The only troops that didn't have that number were the Guards regiments because, they're Guards. They're Guards. The spike was removable by 1914. So I guess they learned their lesson from that one officer who got his head stuck in a doorway. It was this was the original helmet they went to war with in 1914, but this was then replaced in 1916 by the Stahlhelm. Let me see. I'm not sure if I'm afraid I didn't have. I should have put a picture of the Stahlhelm there.
To forget
I do apologize. Very embarrassing. But I think just by talking about the Stahlhelm, everybody recognizes what it is. A deep bowl-like shape. It was a precursor to the German helmet of the Second World War, with flared sides and a pronounced front for increased protection. Now, in terms of protection, this might have been the best helmet of all because it offered superior coverage for the head, neck, and ears, which the other two helmets didn't provide to the same degree. It was made from high-quality steel. It is a German helmet, providing excellent protection against shrapnel and small arms fire. In fact, there is a record of a German soldier at Verdun who actually recorded that it deflected a machine gun bullet, and he survived. He was a bit, knocked up, but he survived. And it proved so effective that variants were used throughout the Second World War and beyond. And most importantly, I think you'll note that it's influenced modern military design, helmet designs to this day, including the helmets worn by NATO forces and Germany, of course. And this will take us to the Second World War
That's
and the
right.
helmet
And
revolution.
by World War II, helmet design had improved even further. The Americans, you can keep the presentation up and go to the next next one. I've got the M1, I think, on there. The Americans introduced the M1 helmet, which was a two-piece system with a steel outer shell and a separate liner. So before we get to that, that's the British
That's the
Mark III
British one.
helmet. Yeah.
This
So
is the M1.
that's the US M1 helmet. And so the two parts there, you can see on the left, you've got the fiberglass liner underneath, and you've got the metal cover, which just nests on top of it. And on the right, there's a picture of what the inside of the fiberglass would look like, with the liner and all the different webbing to hold everything in place and as a suspension. So it would help protect against impact, and also to just the fiberglass liner itself would be the equivalent of your normal construction site helmet that's worn today, in terms of suspension rigging that would help distribute any blows. And then, of course, you got the metal, the hardened metal cover that would protect. Now, we've all used these, and soldiers quickly found additional uses for the M1 from just stopping shrapnel and bullets. It was used to dig foxholes, collect rainwater, boil coffee. There's even an account from a U.S. Marine in the Pacific who wrote about using his helmet as a wash basin for shaving before battle, which is very common. I mean, I used the Canadian variant of the M1 myself to shave, wash, bail water out of my trench, even to brew up water for coffee. Although I panicked initially when I realized that I burnt the paint off the helmet by placing it directly on the hexamine tablet stove. You remember those old hexamine tablets?
Oh, yes.
But my panic quickly subsided when I realized that I could just put the camo cloth cover back on, and the instructors would never know what I'd done. It quickly hid all my sins. But if you go back to the other slide there, in April 1944, just in time for D-Day, the British had introduced the Mark III helmet, which is a slight variation. As you can see, it doesn't have the quite same distinct scooping as the original Brodie helmet did. It offered much better coverage than the older Brodie, and the Canadians used a very similar design with some deeper Mark II becoming a battlefield standard. And the picture on the right is just a camouflage cover. It's a scrim net with different pieces of it. And oftentimes you'd see the iconic photo of Canadian or British troops in World War II after 1944, where they'd usually have a helmet dressing or something like that on the sides, would have a big bulge on the back so they could get at it very quickly.
That's right.
Yeah.
And colloquially, I think it was called the turtle helmet because of the shape of the mold.
Correct.
And it stayed in use during the post-war period, right up into in the UK. I think right up until the 1970s, you see riot police equipped with those helmets that have the visor fixed in the front, but you had the whole turtle shell design. So a very effective helmet actually for a long period of time, considering. So then. Well, let's not forget about going back to the German Stahlhelm, because they also evolved to various degrees during the course of the war. So the British, of course, developed a special paratrooper helmet, quite different from the Brodie, close-fitting. If anything, you can equate it to, I suppose, a version of what the Israelis used to wear up until recently, very close-fitting to the head. And the Germans did the same thing. They took the Stahlhelm and they removed the flared sides and the front protection very close to the head. And so the Fallschirmjäger, the German paratroopers, had a very, very effective helmet when they went into battle. So I think that covers off the Second World War period, really, doesn't it?
And after World War II, we know that helmets kept improving, like all technologies, and the British moved through several iterations, eventually introducing the composite Mark VI, and the Americans held on to the M1 through Korea and Vietnam before switching to the PASGT in the 1980s, made of Kevlar. What does PASGT stand for there, Rejoy?
Before I do that, I'll just go back to the presentation. I'll show a picture of a helmet I think both you and I are extremely familiar with. This is the M1 that pretty much that we wore when we got into it. Note the wonderful chin strap assembly. Brings back a lot of memories. And looking at that helmet, I think that on the one on the left actually is my old helmet. That can cover looks very familiar. But yes, so that would have been what we wore right up until the early 90s.
Late 90s, 1997.
Late 90s, you're right. Yeah. Correct. I stand corrected. So PASGT, as always, the military has this talent for coming up with short words to describe big things. So that stands for the Personnel Armor System for Ground Troops.
Of course.
You know, what we call a helmet, but it's a Personnel Armor System for Ground Troops. And it was a real game changer because it marked the shift from steel to Kevlar, which is a significantly improving ballistic protection while reducing weight. And I remember first hearing the term Kevlar and not knowing what on earth this thing is. You know, used to having that heavy steel hot on your head, and then this is a completely different material. So, unlike the M1, the PA actually, I think I will just share this because there's a nice picture of this here. Let me get to that. There we are. And the PA, well, this is the CG634, but very similar to the PSGT. It offered better coverage from head to neck, enhanced comfort, compatibility with modern tactical gear, which has revolutionized warfare really in these last couple of decades, and sets the foundation for advanced combat helmets that our troops wear today.
Right, and this is a great example. You keep the picture up of Canadians because they also modernized, and we adopted the CG634 in 1997, which had a shape very similar to the American designs, but with improvements in both balance and comfort. Canadian troops in Afghanistan frequently talked about how the helmets absorbed impacts from roadside bombs and small arms fire. I remember the first time I wore one. It was on a winter exercise, and we'd all complained about having to fiddle with the 4 new different strap settings. Change is bad, of course, as we all know.
No,
But man, once you got it set up, unlike the old version, which used to slide, if you remember the old M1 used to kind of bounce around and slide all over the place. Once you got this one set up properly, it really stayed in place well. And it was easy with the latching, particularly in Canada in the winter, to be able to quickly loosen it, and so you could wear a toque or something underneath to protect from the cold.
A really well-designed helmet, superior ballistic protection while remaining lightweight. And the ergonomic design was adapted from a French design, from what I understand, the French Spectre helmet. So offering better weight distribution, as you can attest to yourself, stability and comfort, and reducing neck strain. Now, that's something I never even thought about, but it's very true. Where in the old
particularly
M1
if you look at the front of that helmet on the right, that's just the attachment to hold different pieces. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, absolutely, the neck strain is a really important part.
Exactly. And you've got the enhanced coverage, compatibility with modern communication and tactical gear. That's the other thing with the old M1, trying to put on the headset for the radio and then take your helmet off, put it on, and then, everything gets screwed up. So an excellent choice for today's Canadian Armed Forces.
That's right. And today's helmets are more advanced than ever. The British Brodie system, the American Advanced Combat Helmet, the German, you're going to have to pronounce that, Gefenhelm? Gef.
It's Gefecht.
You just like throwing these in the script just to screw me up, don't you?
Well, I enjoy watching you try and pronounce those words.
But the one thing they all have in common is that they all use lightweight composite materials designed to stop bullets, absorb impacts, and integrate with modern technology.
That's right. And of course, helmets themselves have changed so dramatically from back in the day. They come with built-in communication systems, night vision mounts, ballistic visors. They're experimenting with those now. So apparently some of the newer models are even testing heads-up displays.
Yeah.
So giving soldiers real-time battlefield information. I mean, we're moving into the Star Wars era.
Yeah, and it's working. And besides all the tech, the basics really remain the same, right? It's protecting soldiers from injury. And an example is a British paratrooper during an airborne exercise a couple of years ago in 2021 credited his Virtus helmet with saving his life, because when his parachute malfunctioned and he landed hard on rocky terrain and bashed his head, the helmet absorbed most of the impact. It did its job, preventing a serious brain injury for him. And interestingly enough, though, a modern helmet, although it's pretty light by itself at 3.3 pounds, which is still heavier than the Brodie helmet, which is 2 pounds, roughly 2.2. Once you bolt on the night vision goggles, the comms equipment, the visors, all these things we're talking about, you start getting back to medieval or Roman weight. And worse is the weight is disproportionate in the front, so that's pulling down forward, and that's causing a lot more neck strain. So the equivalent of putting up a 1 or 2 pounds up here, because of the leverage force, if you remember your physics, it's going to cause like up to 8-10 pounds of strain. So when you consider all these modern add-ons are overweighted in the front, just because you need to be able to pull it down. So you can see the amount of neck strain and spinal compression. There's a word we all like to hear. It becomes a real concern.
Yeah, it's very true. But it is also incredible to see how far we've come from the medieval steel tin pot to Kevlar today, and now the advanced composites. Helmets have always been a crucial part of a soldier's gear and survival. Now, you shared with me a very interesting article the other day in the Ottawa Citizen, which talked about how the Canadian military is now funding the development of a new helmet, which is specifically designed to prevent traumatic brain injuries. I guess applying some of the lessons that were recently learned in Afghanistan.
Afghanistan, right? Syria, a lot of these places, Iraq, where the Canadian Armed Forces, Special Forces have been operating for the last few years. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's part of a broader effort to enhance soldier protection and address the basic health concerns associated with these traumatic brain injuries. And the new helmet, the design, what they're trying to work on is to get better blast protection while maintaining that balance of comfort and functionality for Special Forces personnel. And then, as we know, typically, once something is designed for Special Forces and it works, then that design will flow through, maybe adapted somewhat for issue to line troops.
Right. It just goes to show that always evolving, always changing. Not like in the classical times, because back in those days, a Greek soldier meeting a hoplite would have probably worn the helmet his father had worn, who had worn the helmet his father had worn. So there was no such changing of equipment. But today, thank goodness, we try and learn the lessons of what's going on in the battlefield and adapt accordingly, so that soldiers can fight more effectively and be better protected in the field.
That's right. So the next time you see an old military helmet in a museum, remember, it's not just a piece of history. It's something that saved lives, carried coffee, dug trenches, bailed out water, and sometimes, just luckily, even stopped some bullets.
Sometimes. Thanks for tuning into the Rum Ration. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to let us know. Write to us on the website. We love feedback. Throw us some suggestions. And don't forget to subscribe at rumrussian.ca. And any suggestions for future episodes or questions, please feel free. Send them in to us. We want to hear from you.
And until next time, keep your head down and your helmet on. Cheers to history.